IDP Sul, obrigado por participarem. É, essa semana, em Brasília recebe a sessão extraordinária da Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos. Então, nós temos muitos juízes, advogados estrangeiros na cidade. Nós aproveitamos. Alô? E aí? Bom, agora sim, bom dia a todos. É uma alegria recebê-los nessa manhã. Eu comentava que essa semana a Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos recebe os seus juízes e partes numa sessão extraordinária. Então, Brasília tem uma oportunidade única de receber colegas estrangeiros. E eu tenho a felicidade e a honra de ter um dos meus familiares, o Dr. Javier El-Hage, eh, boliviano de nascimento, ah, corintiano de coração, eh, e advogado pela Human Rights Foundation, diretor da Human Rights Foundation, um papel importante no cenário internacional, defesa de direitos humanos. Ele vai poder falar um pouco do trabalho dele. Advogado e também professor na Faculdade de Direito de Fordham, em Nova York. Todos sabem dos esforços do IDP de ampliar seus laços internacionais e internacionalização. O professor Javier vem se somar a essa nossa grande família de vínculos e laços. E uma alegria recebê-lo aqui conosco. Obrigado, professor Bertrand, professor Paulo. Professor, obrigado pela sua presença. Aos alunos, obrigado, Vic, pela presença de todos. Eu queria convidar, após essa breve apresentação, o professor Javier fala português, fala espanhol, mas escolheu inglês como a língua da sua apresentação. Se sente mais à vontade para que faça. Ele dá essa disciplina também em Barcelona, me contava ontem, e muitos alunos de Barcelona vão visitá-lo na Fordham, em Nova York. O que mais eu posso dizer sobre a sua apresentação? Muito bem. Seja bem-vindo, professor. O senhor tem a palavra.
Obrigado. Até lá. Então, oi, tudo bem? Eu falo português, mas eu preferiria dar em inglês, assim, é melhor pro tema também, né? Pro tópico. Então, switch. I'll switch to English, and if I can, I'll stand. Okay? Is that okay? Good, great, awesome. So thank you, Atala. So Atala is a relative of mine, of our Brazilian family, who I met 22 years ago in person, and we've been very good friends since. And I obviously super admire Atala, and there is a reason that also my relationship with Atala has to do with what I'm presenting today, which is that Atala was the first person I met in in let me they told me 40 minutes, so I'm gonna try to be do perhaps a little less than that, but we'll make it interactive. Okay, so you can interrupt me if you have questions, and that way we can make it an interactive chat. But so when I met him, he was working at one of the largest law firms in Brazil, based in Sao Paulo, called Tozini. You've probably heard of it. It's a large law firm in Brazil. And obviously, this large law firm, alongside others, including some international law firms that have offices here in Brazil, most of them in Sao Paulo, they are all modeled after the law firm model of the United States. Um, and uh, and and so, for example, the law firm I worked at, eventually, I worked for a couple of years at a law firm called Milbank LLP. It also has an office in Sao Paulo. Skadden has an office in Sao Paulo. There are several of them. But this is to stress that the U.S. legal cosmos, right? Like the U.S. legal system that involves legal practice as well as legal theory is extremely influential in the world. So much so that when I met my cousin 22 years ago in person, he was working at a law firm that operated to a large extent under the rules of American law firms. So that's why I start with this image right here. Anyone knows what this is? What this is for? Suits. Yeah, so many of you probably have watched Suits. One person that definitely watched Suits and fell in love with Suits was the Prince of Britain, no? So much so that he thought it was so cool and so prestigious to be a paralegal in this fictional, although based in real life story, that he married the paralegal of this story. It's not. It's for real. He actually married her. Obviously, in reality, the first topic that I teach, typically kind of the introduction, I'm giving you in 40 minutes. Hopefully, we'll make it interactive. What a class that it normally takes a semester to give in Guatemala. I teach at the Universidad Francisco Marroquín remotely. This class, I created it on purpose because I'm writing a book about this. Um, I've been in different ways involved with the U.S. legal system since I moved to the U.S. in the year 2008 to do a master's at Columbia University at an LLM. And then after that, I taught, I've worked in the US, I've litigated a little bit, and then I worked at a large law firm. I did a JD at Fordham Law School, where I teach right now. And so for almost 20 years, I've been involved in the US legal system. When I went to the US, I took because I went on a Fulbright scholarship, and they took us to the University of California in Hastings to do a 1 month introduction to the US legal system course. And then at Columbia, I did another 2 weeks of introduction to the US legal system. Plus, I always had an interest since I graduated in Bolivia as a lawyer in 2006 in comparative analysis. And one thing that I noticed is that the introductory courses about the US legal system focus primarily on the differences between common law and civil law, right? Continental law, the case law tradition versus the civil code tradition. Typically, that's the main focus. And then obviously, analysis of Supreme Court case law, which is, great. But I always thought that they missed what in my view are the most extraordinary features of the U.S. legal system. What make the U.S. legal system unique, kind of special, and in a way, in some areas, like in law practice, make it the model of law practice around the world. So this initial chapter of the legal profession in the United States, we typically talk about prestige rankings. Uh, Lawyers seek prestige a lot. I've discovered that over years. They typically say that, but it's true. Uh, um, so we try to go to the law schools that are best ranked, right? And then that leads us to hopefully getting a job at the law firms that are best ranked at Vault.com. So if you have the highest grade on your class, typically you'll be able to go to the highest law firm. And that is the prestige rankings are a downstream of the profit rankings. The prestige ranking is Vault.com. You can look it up. The profit ranking is American Lawyer. They come up with a profit per equity partner ranking. So law firms in America are the partners are making to the tune of maybe the Wachtel, which is probably the most profitable law firm at the equity profits per equity partner level. They probably are making on average $8.5 million per year on average. Which means some partners make 30 and some makes 1, right? When they start. But so all of these numbers that are publicly available because it's part of the industry, that these numbers is publicly available, make for all these aura around law practice about it being a top of the top type thing. um and 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 that's what inspired this writer of Suits to say, oh, you know what, I'm gonna actually write a show about this, and it's gonna be so prestigious that the Prince of England is gonna want to marry the paralegal in it. Obviously, the and we can, in the Q&A, if you're interested in this topic, we can go in depth into some other features of the legal profession of the practice in the U.S., the grading system that's based on a curve. What is the cutoff typically to make it to big law? But this also leads to why some people leave, including myself. Why people and I perhaps 20 years ago when I learned that Atala was leaving Tosini, I was like, why is he leaving Tosini to go to Brasilia? It's like it's so cool. It's like suits. Everyone's amazing, and the paralegals, are very famous. But in reality, obviously, it's a profession in crisis. The law. I mean, this system, the top of the top system, is also a system that has a lot of attrition. When you're in there, it kind of feels that everyone's trying to leave and find a better place, even though you're being paid a very large amount of money, and therefore it's not like you can go on LinkedIn and complain and say, "Oh, my life is miserable because I work too much," because no one's gonna feel pity for you because you're actually making obviously good money. So those are all characteristics of the system. But this is the profession in crisis. There is a book by can't recall his name, but a professor at Northwestern University right now that was a partner for 15 years at one of the most profitable law firms in the U.S. called Kirkland and Ellis. And so he wrote this book about the profession in crisis after being 15 years partner in the U.S. But so this is sort of a fun initial topic that we discussed, but we're not going to be able to go in depth. Wait, I'm trying to go back, but do you know how can I go back? Okay, got it. Yeah, should be this. Perfect. So the 5 topics that we're going to try to address quickly are what I think are the most unique things. We already discussed a little bit of legal practice. This is the model. It was that I already discussed, the Cravath model. A lawyer by the name of Paul Cravath in the early 1900s created this model of professionalized law firms. Obviously, this has evolved over the years, including in the 80s, that there was a shift and suddenly the market became much more liquid, but at the same time, the work hours became crazier and also profits became higher. Email also has changed the system, has made more profits, like the internet, etc. So these are all characteristics of the initial topic, which is an important feature. I didn't call that a chapter, although probably could have been a chapter. But chapter 1 is that makes the U.S. legal system, in my opinion, unique and important, and that you cannot discuss anything related to U.S. law without paying attention to this, is the issue of federalism. Okay, I know Brazil is a federal state. Argentina is, Mexico is, Switzerland is, Spain kind of is through their autonomic um, autonomic system. But in the U.S., it's particularly, you could describe it as is a radical federalism. Okay, and the reason for this radicalism is historic. It's a real federalism, and it starts here. Notice here that this is the July 4th, 1776 Declaration of Independence, and notice how it says here Declaration of the 13 United States. Notice how states here is capitalized because it's a state. Brazil is a state. Bolivia is a state, right? Argentina is a state. They meant to say there are 13 states, okay? United is not even a name. It's not capitalized. This is on purpose. This is not, an oversight. This is on purpose. United is not capitalized because united is just an adjective describing the actual thing that's happening, which is 13 states are becoming independent. And so what this means is all of the states of the United States enacted between 1776, when they declare independence, until they win the independence in 1783, when the British Crown recognizes that they're independent states. Between those years, all the colonies, with the exception of Vermont, which was an independent state, and Connecticut and Rhode Island, which maintained their colonial charters, everyone enacted a full-fledged constitution in 1776. New Hampshire, South Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, all 13 colonies, well, with those exceptions I mentioned, enacted full-fledged constitutions that were preceded by a Declaration of Rights, sometimes called Declaration of Rights, sometimes called Bill of Rights, and then the organic part of the Constitution explaining how the government works. And these governments, all of them, had three branches of government: the executive, the legislative. They obviously these were all influenced by Montesquieu, by the Enlightenment authors of the time. But this is super important because that means there were 13 full-fledged governments with judiciaries, with legislatives operating before, in 1787, 11 years after the Declaration of Independence, and 11 years after most of these governments were operating under separate constitutions, only 11 years after did they decide to create this federal government. So this is important because it means that still today, the legal reality of the United States is 85%. If you're an immigrant right now, obviously, yes, it's 90% of your legal reality feels that it might be federal law, because yes, federal law controls immigration, among other things. And if you're, very famous drug trafficker from Mexico or from Bolivia, recently there was a drug trafficker that was caught. Also, large drug trafficking operations are controlled at the federal level, so it feels that everything is federal. But for most normal people, in your daily lives, 80% of your legal life in the United States is state-based. I, as a lawyer, my life is state-based. I was sworn as a lawyer under the Constitution of New York. I am a New York lawyer, recognized by the state of New York. If I want to practice in New Jersey, which is across the Hudson River, I have to do a thing. I have to get reciprocity with maybe, because I've already been a lawyer for 5 years, maybe they'll give me reciprocity, and I'll be able to appear before a court in New Jersey. But normally, I'm a lawyer in New York. If you commit a crime in the United States, if I mean, hopefully not, but someone commits a crime, it's gonna be a state crime. It's a state prosecutor, a New York prosecutor, a New Hampshire prosecutor, a California prosecutor, a Texas prosecutor will come, will investigate. Well, we'll charge you. A Texas judge will convict you, and you will go to a Texas jail. You're not going to go to a federal jail. So the federal government has its own jurisdiction. It's kind of a 51st government. There are 51 governments in the United States, the 50 states plus the one federal government. But they all operate, they interact sometimes, but understanding this is the first thing in order to understand the US legal system and the levels of separation that exists between the subnational governments and the federal government. In most other forms of federalism is not as big as the US, so this is the one most important thing. And to illustrate a little bit on how this plays out in practice, for example, all the challenges, the majority of the challenges that you see happening at the Supreme Court level for very political, federal level, state, nationwide interesting things like abortion, like gay marriage or same-sex marriage, like things like that get challenged at the national level. Typically, the way federal courts are organized and the way the country is generally, like Brazil, like many other countries, divided ideologically. Some states are more on the left of the political spectrum. Some states are more on the right of the political spectrum. So based on that, based on which states are where, typically challenges start by governors, by impact litigation, strategic litigation nonprofits, on the left or more on the left of the political spectrum, the ACLU, more on the right of the political spectrum, the Institute for Justice. They start litigation on purpose the moment they want to challenge something in many different districts, and then this creates splits of federal law interpretation at the circuit court levels. So the circuits that are in the states that are a little bit more conservative rule one way, the other circuits rule the other way, and then the Supreme Court says, okay, because there is a split, I'm going to intervene so that there isn't a split, that there isn't a divergence of understanding of the Constitution so that we can read it together. It's okay if you read it separately most of the time. If some circuits have different interpretations, but for some issues, like again, same-sex marriage, abortion, the Supreme Court sometimes says, okay, you know what? I'm gonna decide, um, so that there is no split. And typically, the solution of the Supreme Court is to say, like it happened recently with Roe versus Wade, by overturning Roe versus Wade, the abortion Supreme Court case. What it did was, it didn't say abortion is now banned forever under federal law. What it said is, as the federal government, we're not going to intervene on this topic. The Constitution leaves it to states to decide. So some states will ban abortion or will be more harsh on abortion. Some states won't. So see how even in the solution that the Supreme Court issues, the topic of federalism is key, and understanding the how the federal the how federalism operates in practice is key. Second topic that is extraordinary: freedom of speech. In particular, two types of of regulations that or of laws that come from theories under the First Amendment that are different than most countries in the world. And that, coincidentally, since I'm here for an Inter-American Court of Human Rights um, hearing, coincidentally, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has adopted some of this, particularly this first part, as law under the under Article 13 of the American Convention on Human Rights. And these two areas are defamation, defamation of public figures and public officials, and the other area is the level of incitement slash hate speech. Okay, so in the U.S., it is very hard to for a politician or for a public figure to sue and win a defamation suit. That's why you don't hear it a lot. I follow a lot Spanish politics and Spanish football too, and even the president of Barcelona or the president of Real Madrid, they're constantly threatening journalists with a defamation suit if they say something that is not accurate. In the U.S., starting with the New York Times v. Sullivan case, the standard was made very difficult through the actual malice standard, um, very difficult for any person that is famous. Essentially, today this public figure standard would apply potentially um, to influencers, right? Soccer players, for sure, football players. You know, why? The logic is they already have a bully pulpit. They can already speak their truth, contradict journalists, contradict other public people. We're going to leave the courts for situations where whoever defamed them has acted with actual malice, which means knowledge of falsehood or reckless disregard for the truth, right? So it's a standard that is higher than just being inaccurate. And so as a result, again, journalists are very heavily protected. Again, this was adopted through a decision a few years ago, or it was an interpretation probably from the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression. It was adopted. I haven't been following the specific case law of the Inter-American Court to see if they have been faithful with this adoption. But initially, they said that they believe in this standard as well. And then here, the U.S. is one of the very few. It's perhaps the only developed democracy. If you count all European countries, Canada, etc., that does not ban hate speech. Okay, but this is part of a philosophy that comes from Oliver Wendell Holmes' dissent opinion in the Schenck case, where he spoke about the marketplace of ideas, and he spoke about how the best test of truth is the power of an idea to impose itself in the marketplace of ideas through the test of time and science and etc. Because at different times, very intelligent people thought the world was flat. In fact, there's some intelligent people even today, football players and things like that think that also say that every once in a while. Um, but the idea is that let the scientists win by showing the evidence, and that becomes the truth, right? So because of that, the U.S. is committed to no content-based restrictions on speech. In other words, you can say crazy things on the left of the political spectrum, like there should be no private property and everyone should live in like a whatever communist gulag, as well as crazy things on the right, like there should be no immigrants, they should like be removed from the country, whatever is the craziest thing of the moment in the political public square, the idea is that they are allowed to do it. The only type of restrictions that exist on that front are time, place, and manner restrictions. So yes, you cannot, in the US, you cannot block a street to protest whatever it is that you want to protest. You can protest at particular places from certain times, depending on obviously the nature of the place. If the place is a public square, you can be there all day long. No one can kick you out ever. But if the place is outside of a school, then there can be time, place, and manner restrictions, but no content-based restrictions. And there have been a couple of cases, Brandenburg v. Ohio and Skokie, that also made incitement an almost impossible thing to prove, um, if it's only based on speech. For incitement to be banned, it really it needs to promote imminent lawless action. It needs to be almost accomplice liability. It needs to be a crowd is about to beat somebody and they have the sticks in their hands and they're about to beat them, and I have a position of authority and I tell them beat them. It's not just me on the microphone saying, hey, we should all come out to the streets and protest. That would not be incitement. uh, and these are all 1960s cases in a context of racial struggle within the United States. So super crazy, cases that involve the Ku Klux Klan, that involve, uh, in this case, it was a Nazi party march in Skokie, in the Skokie case, a Nazi party march in a very small town that was upheld as it cannot be banned on grounds of content. So, these tests happen in a context of very shocking things that were happening, and so the U.S. continues to be committed to allowing crazy things to be said legally, uh, and there is no argument of hate speech, which, for example, the International Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the American Convention on Human Rights, are open to banning hate speech. Okay, but not in the U.S. If it doesn't become incitement. Okay. Any questions so far up until here, just to make it more interactive? No. No. Okay. Um, by the way, these are all AI generated images, so these are not not uh, not actual images. These are the time, place, and manner restrictions. I think these are cool. So they're supposed to be any restriction by the government on speech is not supposed cannot be. It will be struck down if it's content based. It needs to be content neutral. It cannot be about content. It needs to be content neutral. Um, I've seen this. I've lived in New York City for 18 years. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty amazing. Maybe saw this 15 years ago or 17, 16 years ago for the first time. I remember at Union Square, there was a pro-Palestine, march, demonstration, and also and pro-Israel. Some pro-Israel folks went to the demonstration, and I remember I was, having grown up in Bolivia. In Bolivia, it's literally legal, kind of, under the free speech standard, for minors to demonstrate with dynamite. They literally blow up dynamite in the middle of the street while they're demonstrating, just to make sure that everyone is aware that they're demonstrating, right? And this stuff passes as freedom of speech in the country I was born. So I was really impressed with these people that hated each other. They're accusing each other of horrendous things, the Palestinian march and the Israeli march, and the police were just standing in the middle without taking a position on anything that was happening, just making sure that they can shout at each other, they cannot hit each other, they cannot touch each other. The moment they touch each other, then they get arrested, because touching and hitting is battery, is assault, it's a crime. But the First Amendment protects that they can say things that is completely against the views of the other party, and they're both forced to just contain themselves. If they don't contain themselves, then they get charged and there's crimes. But typically, that's the role of the NYPD. I am not an NYPD officer. I don't know the training they get, but I'm pretty sure that in some part of their training, they get told this about the government not being supposed to get involved on the actual content of what people are talking about, but on the time, place, and manner, yes, when it's justified. And when you do the time, place, and manner restrictions, it also gets the highest standard of scrutiny is strict scrutiny. You're supposed to show that your regulation is content neutral, that it is narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest, and that it leaves open alternative channels for communication. So it's a high standard. So that's the part, the free speech part. Another part that it's an unsung hero, in my opinion, of the U.S. legal system, or an unsung extraordinary situation of the U.S. legal system, is the tort system. Who has been to the US driving in a highway, or with your family driving in a highway ever? What part of the US? Washington, D.C. Did you see any billboards of lawyers? What did you think about that? It's strange, right? So most people coming from normal countries around the world, like from Europe or from South America, when they see that, they're like, regulations against attorney advertisement here in the US must be very lax. Because in my countries, attorneys are prestigious. They're not putting themselves up in billboards for people to call them. That's not just not classy, but it should also be illegal, right? That's our kind of instinct when we see that. But it took me some time to discover, because also in law school they typically, there was a class of torts, but they typically don't go in depth into it. But the reality is that one of the things that make the U.S. legal system most unique, and perhaps that normal people appreciate more, or that find it more extraordinary, is the tort system, okay? Which reflects itself in a particular type of torts, because torts involves battery, assault. I already mentioned it a little bit. False imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. These are the intentional torts. Then there's the negligence torts, and this is what I'm speaking about right now. All these law firms that are advertising, they're advertising their services for negligence cases. They call it injury cases. They call it accident cases. They call it slip and fall. They call it medical malpractice cases, but they're all negligence cases. And the way to prove negligence, duty breach, causation, damages. This is some of the most interesting class for anyone in law school. Typically, torts has the most fun cases, crazier cases. Um, uh, but it has a very important it has a very important feature in the legal system. Product liability, obviously, that is also a tort. A tort. But this is the part I was talking about. So these are the billboards, also generated by AI, by the way, but they're very good because they're based in real billboards. These billboards you see everywhere in America, and there is a reason for it. What's the reason? According to the courts, and this is something that started developing in the 1800s, consolidated through the 20th century, and it's a pretty set thing at this point, which is that these private attorneys, normal attorneys, by the way, I remember I started speaking about suits. Suits, by the way, it's technically modeled after Wachtel, which is the most prestigious right now. Law firm, very small amount of partners, etc. Revolutionized the market of law firms in the 1980s alongside with Scott and Arps. But so those are kind of the high end, top, the famous big law attorneys. But in big law, only around 15% of all lawyers in America practice in big law. So it's a very niche practice. Yes, they make a lot of money. They have horrendous quality of life, but it's a niche thing. 80% of the lawyers work in different things, and a percentage of them, can't recall what is the number, but not a small percentage of them work in this area. For law firms that do this work. What is the nature of this industry? They, according to the courts, to the courts, they play a role that is called the attorney. Let's see if it's here. They play the role of private attorney general. Okay, so the logic is, what does an attorney general does? How do you say attorney general in Portuguese? Procurador, is it? Ministerio Público. And so, Ministerio Público privado. It's it's the role that according to the U.S. legal system, private lawyers should play. Why? Ministerio Público, why does a Ministerio Público exist, even, like an attorney general? Well, because, under the Lockean theory of the state of nature, or whatever, one of the first things you think it's a good deal to delegate in a social contract to the government is the ability to actually go and arrest somebody for a horrendous thing that they did. In order to get ourselves removed from the ojo por ojo, diente por diente, right? Olio por olio, is it espada? La ley del talión, so the historic way in which humans, resolve disputes, which is you kill my mom, then I kill your mom, or there was horrendous things written in most of the ancient codes about this. You were supposed to be retributive with your thing. So obviously, you give that to the Ministerio Público. If they kill someone in your family, the Ministerio Público investigates and send them for 30 years to jail, whatever. The logic is these are the most horrendous crimes, the most horrendous injustices that happen in a society. Then we create a specific government office that will take care of this. The rest, you try to take care of it from a private perspective. But if you're talking damages, typically from a private perspective, it's very difficult for normal people, people that are not wealthy, to access lawyers. Lawyers are expensive. The court system is expensive, so it's difficult. So what this system allows is law firms operate based on loans. Typically, there is an entire industry of loans to law firms that are litigating this type of case, and then the court system will allow them to operate on a contingency basis. That means that if they win a large award for their client, they will get a percentage of it. So, and the percentage is already written in the decision. So the decision will say this part will go to the lawyers, the rest will go to. So the courts check this. It's not like law firms can get 50%. No, typically maximum that they'll get is 25% if the amount is not so large. If it's super large, then it's going to be less than that. So the logic is, yes, the lawyers will get paid well, but they're not supposed to be making money like business people on this, right? They're not. That's not the logic. But the courts will allow this contingency-based litigation industry to operate for the little guy. Like the logic is construction workers, undocumented immigrant construction workers that get hurt on a construction site, they will be able to sue under this system and get large awards. Or if they die, which are typically wrongful death suits, if their families will be able to sue for millions of dollars. Like even if they're destitute people, typically the awards are millions of dollars. Just recently in the New York subway, someone lost, I think it was a Pakistani worker, lost like 3 toes from his foot, and he got like $3 million, something like that. So, yeah, there's several cases that are interesting. Another I mentioned here contingency basis, and then the other thing is uncapped damages. In the U.S., there have been movements, but damages still today, for the most part, are uncapped. What that means is there is no maximum. If you can prove that your husband was going to make in his life $10 million, you can get a $10 million award if he died as a result of someone else's negligence. Okay, in a tort case. So this entire industry that is at display when you're driving in a highway, and that people think, oh, this must be just lax regulation. It's actually on purpose. It's meant for the little guy that when he hears lawyers, it's like, no, hopefully I'm never going to need a lawyer, never go to a lawyer because I don't have the money to pay a lawyer for anything. These guys tell you, you can come, if you got hurt in an accident in this highway you're riding right now, or you have a family member, just call this number. We'll show you how we can defend you for free. And then when you win, if you win, I'm gonna get paid. So that's the courts allow this to operate because of that, and it has a real effect. It has a number of effects. Some of those effects include the insurance industry. That's why in the U.S. everyone is insured, everything is insured because of this. Because if someone slips and fall, and then go ahead.
Yes. So now I'd like to mention something.
Uh-huh.
Let's try to
Okay.
talk a little bit in English. In Brazil, usually the Ministério Público used to do that work, but since 1980s, we split, and so we have Ministério Público and Defensoria Pública. Defensoria Pública is the public attorney in charge of defending people like suffered an accident in a road. So, and but for criminal purpose, only the público, Ministério Público can act. But for private disputes, that's the Defensoria Pública.
And have they ever discussed doing it, leaving it to private practitioners, and actually, because I know that Brazil kind of looks up to the U.S. on a lot of these
Yeah,
things historically.
yes, because the Constitution 1988 imposed the Defensoria Pública. But in São Paulo State, back to some years ago, we used to have private lawyers doing the work based on certain fees. Typically in Brazil, we have a success fees based on percentage up from 10 to 20%, but that's for all cases. But in São Paulo, we used to have public attorneys doing that job, but now that ended.
But for the 10 or 20% to be meaningful, then the awards need to be very high, right? And
Yes.
that's one of the characteristics here. So, for example, in the US, the awards are between $1 and $5 million for tort cases. For wrongful death cases, these are for wrongful death when your family member got killed as a result of someone else's negligence. In the UK, this number doesn't reach 2 million, and it starts at $100,000, right? Western Europe is even lower in general. So this is a unique kind of characteristic that creates an entire industry, which again goes all the way to influencing the insurance industry. And at the same time, the insurance industry is an asset manager class, right? All the large insurance companies, just like the California Teachers Pension Funds, is one of the most influential and powerful, wealth management institutions, and financial institutions. So the same, there is a number of in Brazil, I'm sure too. Like insurance companies are huge everywhere, but in the US, as a result, it's huge because everyone is insured. If you have any business of any shape, it has multiple insurance policies, and so this leads to capitalism being, and capital markets and financial markets being having more depth as well. So there are consequences, I think, that for sure that come from this. And the fourth kind of topic that I kind of hinted at already is that the U.S. and in particular New York is the legal nerve of international finance, right? Uh, why this is? It's historic. It's as many other things. New York became a capital of commerce in the 1600s, 1700s, and then it became the place where the modern investment bankers started operating and innovating and creating forms of financing, and that created what still today is kind of the most famous um, capital markets organization, which is the New York Stock Exchange, which is placed in Wall Street. And all the ecosystem that we've discussed kind of revolves around that. Investment banks, large law firms. And so from a legal perspective, and I'm sure Atala has experience with that when he was working at Tosini, almost any large finance operation will involve New York law because most of the banks have their initial headquarters in New York, and for 200 years, New York judges, both state and federal, have been sitting on these cases and have developed a case law that is, predictable, that it's fair for the most part, feels fair for the business people, and there isn't corruption. I always say, like, unfortunately, in my country, my home country, in Bolivia, there are infamous cases and you hear it from friends that practice, that at certain levels, even before the Supreme Court, some legal disputes are really bidding wars. Who pays the judge of the Supreme Court a higher bribe, essentially? That's how bad some legal systems can be in the world. Where in the US, we're talking billions of dollars in amounts for the majority of these large lawsuits that involve banks, financial institutions, that involve large creditors, large debtors, corporations, etc. And yet, you don't hear cases of judges taking bribes, for example. That's normally very unheard of. Um, and judges make less money than private practitioners, but by far. A second year, you can look it up now in the era of ChatGPT, can tell you a lot of things. You can look it up. How much on average does an associate justice of the United States Supreme Court, the most famous judges in the country, make? And the initial associate justice, I think, compensation was like 250,000. Maybe right now it's a little more, but it's around that, between 250 and $300,000 a year. The government takes half of it, so don't get too excited. But that's the second year associate salary in one of the large law firms. Okay, so a fourth year associate salary almost certainly is making more money than the most famous judge in the country. And these are I'm talking the U.S. Supreme Court. The New York judges make a little less because they cannot, the Southern District or New York judges cannot be making more money. So the lawyers sitting on the El Chapo Guzman case, on the Nicolas Maduro case, on all of these cases, the judges, they're making less money than a third year associate at a large law firm. But there is a lot of integrity. There is a lot of still, credibility of the legal profession, and this involves the role of judges that are able to sit in these huge cases and win. Uh, these are just some of the innovations that the U.S. legal system has been big on. Like I worked at a law when I was at the law firm, I worked in capital markets and in securitized products. Um, but in general, it's a market that innovates, and typically after innovations happen in Wall Street by large investment banks and large law firms that make it into a reality, typically courts defer to the business innovation. They are not checking on things unless the illegal things are happening, and this leads to innovation in the world of finance around the world, because then these same law firms that have offices in London or in Brazil end up bringing these innovations to the extent that they're allowed to other countries, and some of them are successful for the most part, and no one criticizes them. Some of them might lead to problems. For example, the CDOs cause to in large extent the over creation of CDOs and synthetic CDOs ended up creating the crisis of the 2008. So it's a different topic. But so this goes into it. And then the final, these are all, just to mention this, any acquisition finance, project finance deal will typically involve New York law, because most of the large creditors have, again, because of the reason I mentioned, obviously their offices are not now headquartered in New York, yet many of them are, but that's not the most important part. Right now, the reason they're there and there's New York law applicable to this is the fact that the court system already has a tradition and hundreds of years worth of case law that makes it attractive, just to make sure that things are that you're doing the responsible thing for your corporation. You put New York law, and on that topic, very importantly, I'm not sure it's here. It might be on the next topic, but another area of transactional law that is huge. I flew here yesterday from New York in a LATAM flight, and LATAM alongside Aeromexico and alongside what is the other Brazilian airline? But it wasn't Gol. Okay, Azul is a so, but it was LATAM that operated in Brazil and Chile and some other country, and Aeromexico and Avianca, the Colombian airline. I actually worked on the Avianca restructuring. So the Chapter 11 restructurings at federal bankruptcy court in New York, also explains why all of the typically large finance contracts are New York law. What does this mean? It means I will lend you hundreds of millions of dollars, but if you don't pay me, I'm not going to destroy your company or start selling burgers myself. Like if you lend money to McDonald's and you're a creditor, you're not interested in keeping the business. You're interested in McDonald's to be able to restructure their problem and continue to operate under the same CEO many times, right? So that what that means is Chapter 11 process. It's called bankruptcy court, but it doesn't mean you liquidate everything and then the company ceases to exist. 90% of the time, what a Chapter 11 filing will lead to is a restructuring of the company, where the large creditors that lend the company money that they can't pay back at this point, they restructure their capital structure in a way that creditors now, I mean, equity holders, the owners, the people that have shares in the company typically will lose most of their investment. The creditors will get some replacement I mean, will not lose their investment, but will become shareholders, and you will get new creditors, a new set of creditors that will make the company relive. And that typically is a process that might last 1 year. So in 1 year during COVID, Avianca, Aeromexico, all of these companies made sure that they can continue, LATAM, made sure that they could continue to operate. And they did it all in Chapter 11 court in New York. Why not in Brazil? There's so many beautiful courts here, and or in Mexico City. Well, mostly it's something that is already defined in the contracts where they got the money, because the creditors put New York law, and so in part they put New York law not just because they're sure that the courts will uphold the rights to that money, but also because the legal infrastructure will allow for them to continue to operate, to continue to exist. So everyone's going to be happy, including the CEO of LATAM and the CEO of Aeromexico will be happy, because this system will allow them to, um, for capitalism to minimize losses and maximize gains in that context. So this is also a very important feature. That's an unsung feature, the feature of Chapter 11 restructurings in the U.S. So that's actually, I had it here as part of the transnational nature of the U.S. legal system. You know, the fact that companies from everywhere in the world will restructure in New York court for Chapter 11 restructuring is definitely one of those features. Um, and then there is the new. Who has heard or who has worked here? Even if you practice at a company, you probably worked in the area of compliance. Anyone has worked or looked in anyone in like any idea what compliance is? What's compliance? Oh, professors probably know. Anyone? What's compliance? So the compliance system, which most jobs as lawyers, the people graduating as lawyers, there are going to be many jobs in the field of compliance. You'll hear that, like the compliance office of a large company will have many jobs advertised. Why? Because the transnational nature of the U.S. legal system has led many companies, transnational corporations that operate around the world, to be liable before U.S. criminal enforcers, like the Department of Justice under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, to be liable for violations that occurred in other countries, in China, in Brazil. And obviously, here, the most famous of those was the Odebrecht case that led to the highest settlement. Uh, the Odebrecht scandal, in fact, it was the Petrobras scandal, generated massive U.S. securities class actions. Foreign issuers with 8 years listed in New York exposed to the full force of U.S. securities law. It also generated the largest FCPA settlement in history. And these are enforcing by U.S. enforcement institutions of, in this case, federal transnational law that leads to large amounts of fines to companies. So typically the way it works is if a large, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan Chase, most large government banks that you've heard of, they have been at one point, at least probably all of them, I'm not sure if all of them, but just off the top of my head, most of them have been fined with hundreds of millions of dollars for something that happened in their Mexico office, money laundering for drug cartels that maybe most people didn't know, but they should have known. Like whoever was driving the business, they should have asked more questions, and they didn't. And so what this typically leads to is to a non-prosecution agreement, to a settlement agreement where the government says, okay, I'm only going to give you a $300 million fine or $1 billion fine. I'm not going to charge you criminally. I'm not going to put you in jail because you have convinced me that you were not aware specifically. When some person in the office is aware, that person in the office will go to jail. But typically part of the agreement is you will create a large compliance program, and your compliance program will make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. So because of that, there is a new area of the law, which is the area of legal compliance. When I studied law in the early 2000s, no one heard that, like, the word compliance didn't exist. And now large companies, they have a compliance department. And this is because of these investigations that lead to to a lot of work. And also, most right now of the litigation practice at large law firms focuses on investigations as opposed to actual trials. So it's a very large area. So with those, those are essentially the this is the last slide. So with that, I've given you kind of an overview of what I think are the most extraordinary things of the U.S. legal system. Please ask questions. so so that, let me, if you have any questions in Spanish, Portuguese, English, feel free to. Yes.
Uh, I would like to go deeper in these transnational issues,
Okay.
which is we're kind of suffering consequences on Trump administration because that uh, that tools are are getting improved. Like we have Magnitsky sanctions on Brazil, on a Supreme Court judge, and also we discuss. There's a public discussion on that because there are drug dealers on certain kind of mafia,
Mm-hmm.
PCC and
Mm-hmm.
Comando Vermelho, to Brazilian mafias, and maybe we get sanction on that. Uh, uh, that would make it hard for our banks and societies to work. And how can how you see the transnational effects on that? Because uh, you know uh, New York law, American law
Mm-hmm.
are improving, but it has effects on our lives. Although you've never been to United States, or maybe you never
Uh-huh.
ever traveled to United States, how you see that?
So these is the areas that I've focused on the role on the transnational nature of the U.S. legal system are more, I think, long term. They have been going on for 40 years, and they are connected to some important features of the U.S. legal system, including, for example, the last that I mentioned, the FCPA enforcements. I've talked to partners at large law firms that have practiced for 30 years, and they mentioned that this tends to change. For example, the enforcement in DOJ anti-corruption practices, for example, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Trump said in a speech, "If we don't pay bribes, we're not going to be competitive with foreign companies. Like if our companies don't pay bribes in China, they're not going to be competitive with other companies." He's essentially, I'm probably misquoting him, but since it's very difficult to sue for defamation in the United States, they're not going to be able to sue me. So the I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. So Trump is a very colorful president. I always say, unfortunately, he has the character of an authoritarian leader. Um, but institutions, for the most part, I think prevent that what he would like to do, he's able to do full fledged. Like for example, I don't know, he would like to get reelected, but the Constitution bans a third re-election, so he's not going to be able to do it. And the Supreme Court has already showed that it will rule against him on other things. So it will definitely rule against him if he tries to find a way to get reelected, for example, right? So, but among the things that he has done that I think is an is a an I mean, first, three things that I think are not positive developments of the enforcement power that the U.S. legal system has and typically has used. One is what I mentioned. There's something to say like the U.S. Yeah, I understand that if you don't pay bribes in Pakistan, probably you're not going to get that big highway, but that's fine. I mean, there is a prestige that goes into it. American companies don't operate in environments where there is like crazy amounts of bribes. Great, I think that is generally something good for the legal system, and I don't think makes the U.S. system less competitive. It makes a potential businessman that did his money bribing not be in your country club, and which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, right? So this is some examples of his lack of enforcement on FCPA things.
or his announcement of being less emphatical on enforcing FCPA is not a positive thing. For what I understand, some enforcement continues to happen, but that's one, I think, negative development. Another negative development is I'm very familiar with the Magnitsky sanctions. The Global Magnitsky Act, it's an act promoted by Bill Browder, American businessman whose lawyer was killed in Russia, and his main focus was, let's sanction with removal of visas and bank account freezing any individual that is connected to large human rights violations or large corruption cases, especially if tied to human rights violations. So gross human rights violations and corruption cases. And he promoted this bill in many countries in the world, including in the United States, and that's the Magnitsky Act. I work at a human rights organization, and we've promoted sanctions against public officials in Venezuela, in Nicaragua for Magnitsky violations. Um, we know that Brazil is problematic. I was mentioning over dinner yesterday to Atala, when the right wing government wins, everyone on the left says he's a dictator and he is the worst dictator in the world. When the left wing government wins again, Corinthians fan, everyone is like, oh my God, everyone on the right, not obviously not people on the center left, but like the people on the right, typically it's like, oh my God, communism is here again and corruption and everything, all the bad things. And there is some truth to a grain of truth to everything that is said, but we consider Brazil to be a democracy still, like and problematic with issues, with weaknesses, etc. But we think that probably you're gonna get your right wing government again in 4 years, and then another left wing government, and that's how democracy is supposed to operate. Uh, so I don't think it's a responsible application of the power of the federal government of the United States to meddle in clearly democratic nations with Magnitsky sanctions. It defeats the purpose of Magnitsky sanctions. It cheapens them. The whole purpose of Magnitsky sanctions are to go after the worst dictators in the world, not to go after a democratic government that you don't like because it's on the other side of the political spectrum, and the people that you like are accusing him of doing horrendous things. And I know that there's some truth again to I've seen the case. I've had calls with people in Brazil about the case of this particular judge, and I know that he's seen kind of like as a rogue judge that oversteps the boundaries. But even then, in that context, I would have, I wouldn't have used, if I were the president of the United States, which I'm not, and I would have used. I probably wouldn't have used my list extensions. I think it's a misplacing of the government authority. And what this might lead to is that future president might completely it's politicized that if this is seen as something politicized by the executive, is something that they might stop using in the future and be a negative development. So 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 yeah. So I mean, those are a couple thoughts based on something that you mentioned. Did I leave something outside?
No, but
This is in general.
I would like to change the topic of the talk, but as you mentioned, I wouldn't like to change the topic of your talk, but as you mentioned, the compliance system and the influence, transnational influence of American law, it has very interesting effects on
Hmm.
on the whole world, and using on good using it for good purpose,
Hmm.
it is just fine, but maybe it's misused or for bad
Correct.
purpose, and it's kind of a legal war. There are instruments that can be used in a legal war against countries or politicians that are not on your side. I think you got the point, and I'm presenting that.
Exactly. And that's obviously it's a negative development, I would say. I would say it's a negative development to be to
And
politicize it. That's why, I mean, we at the organization I work at, we emphasize in separating what countries are still democratic and what countries are already authoritarian regimes, because there is a nature, a significant difference between, as an international thing, we are an international human rights organization, but when as an international human rights organization, I intervene in Brazil in favor of abortion or against abortion, in favor of, even though the topics are, universal, I do feel that there is a little bit of intervening in domestic discussions that are valid that Brazilians should have, like on the left and on the right. So when you come with like your seal of I'm in a New York office, I know better than you what your morals are or should be. You know what I mean? Like we don't. That's why we only focus in countries that are ruled already by an authoritarian regime. It can be on the left, it can be on the right. We'll go after you on any topic under the sun, but not in democratic countries. And kind of the U.S. government, with some legislation, including the Magnitsky Act, I think generally tries to follow this logic, right? For example, the state sponsors of terrorism designation. It's only historically, it's North Korea, it's Iran, it's Cuba. It's literally the worst dictatorships, totalitarian dictatorships around the world. So typically, the U.S. has been, how do you say, prudent in how these how the actual application of these tools has been. And so this is an example of, in my opinion, overstepping, like being not prudent. You're intervening in one of the largest, democracies in Latin America in a way that appears partisan and not motivated by long-term policy.
Well, any other questions? More questions?
Anything about the Prince? What's his name? Prince Andrew? Is it the one that married Prince Harry? Sorry, Prince Andrew is the bad guy, right? Harry is a good guy.
Well, people are shy. People are shy here. Let's.
That's okay. And feel free to get my information, Professor Correa. Honorável. Professor Correa. Honorável é o nome, o título para os juízes é honorável?
Em português, is meritíssimo.
Meritíssimo, Professor Correa. Eu vou deixar o meu email com ele. I'll leave my email with him. So you can feel free to email me, and we can jump on a Zoom call. And if you were shy to ask a question and want to jump on a Zoom call and ask the question, happy to participate. And if you go to New York in the near future, please visit us. Feel free to visit me. We have our office in the Empire State Building. So you will if you go to New York, you'll probably go to the Empire State Building anyway. But if you come to our office and visit us, you're gonna save, I think it's $50 or something to go up to the Empire State Building. So there you go. I'm giving you another incentive
Is
to bring
anyone
me up.
planning to be in the United States with our next travel in IDP?
He's coming in April, so he's definitely gonna be there.
But Victoria told me the plan is to have a tour on New York by July 2027. So if you feel, prepare yourself. Every July and January, we organize trips. Last trip we went to London. Maybe on January to California, and then New York.
January, better to go to California than to go to New York for sure because of
Too
the weather.
cold.
The New York is -20. This year it was like
Professor
-20.
Paulo has questions. I would have many questions on the Magnitsky and everything else, but I think we can have this talk later on.
Yes.
Professor Paulo. Let's ask on the microphone. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Fortunately, I missed some of it. Sorry to take a call. But I have one curiosity about the American legal system. It has to do with the fact that when you look at state courts, even in federal courts sometimes, most of the cases don't even go to trial, right? You have a culture of deals and making deals with the prosecutor's office of the defense. I mean, and sometimes, and when I was in the United States doing some research on the courts and the Supreme Court, I interviewed one judge in the DC circuit, the federal circuit in DC, and he said, well, yeah, judges in the United States are very prestigious, they're very powerful, but sometimes we don't really seem to be really part of the judicial processes because everything is decided in closed doors, and then it just comes to the judge to make sure the procedures of the deal are all right, there are no abuses, and he doesn't have a say, and it won't go to trial. And in many cases, that there's been criticism about it because you say, I mean, there are abuses from the prosecutor's office that may say, if you plead guilty, I will ask for 2 years. But if not, like for a minor crime or anything, but if you don't plead guilty, let's say a young boy, he did something wrong, and I mean, I will ask for 20 years. So it's up to you. Let's make a deal. And so there's lots of coercion, and it's very hard to. How does the U.S. legal system try to prevent or minimize this kind of abuses?
That's an excellent question. And so what this course is about is it's kind of the 30,000 feet view of what I think is the most, like, if you look at the US like legal system, what are the things that you can see from 30,000 feet, right? Like the mountains, the big things that I think many of them as the torches, and probably for some of you, perhaps you haven't heard a lot about the negligence system. Uh-huh. Yes.
This is something that I always think about this kind of coercion that the U.S. legal system has, and add to that, the U.S. legal system is very expensive. So to this situation, you you add this expensive, the costs are very high. So the person who is being charged think about maybe confess, not only because of the correction, but because the cost uh, eh, uh, is very high. So I'd like you to talk about this, the question, this the
The,
cost thing.
the component of the
Yes.
cost being very high. Yes. Um, so the 30,000 feet view is these five topics that I generally touched on, but obviously within the actual day to day of U.S. legal practice, there are several topics that are um, subject to criticism, including some of the ones that I showed here. For example, there is criticism to the tort system that it thinks it makes the society too litigious, the cases are too expensive, it makes it about money instead of about you know actually being morally taken care of. But obviously, this vision on the tort system has won, continues to win in the courts, and the private attorney general function that these lawyers, I see this, they're despicable. Like I'm sitting on the subway, and there is a guy say that right now over the last like 6 months, there's a guy called the Bull, Michael the Bull something. It's a lawyer. Michael the Bull something, I'm gonna win every case for you. And the guy looks like a bull, actually. It's a huge guy, and like he's just this kind of mafia type. So I don't like it. But if I were an undocumented Ecuadorian dude that lost a leg as a result of the negligence of the company that was running my business, the business where I was working, even though I showed a fake social security card in order to get the job and everything, I will get and if I die, my wife will get like a good $2-3 million. So and ultimately, you know, I don't like it because I have been lucky to be educated and gone to some of the great best schools for law in the world and live in one of the most amazing city in the in all that. So maybe for me it's too lowbrow, but the reality is that for people that need it, they get it for free. They get it. So that goes a little bit to the cost. That's why the tort system, I put the tort system as an example of what I think is overlooked, but that is really great overall. Um, there are negative things. In the U.S., I would say something that is more negative. For example, the plea bargain thing. Just very quickly, um, it is also a very unique feature of the U.S. legal system. It probably comes from English law. This plea bargain situation. I remember when I was researching, I wrote a paper. Some of these areas that I've showed here, I've written papers on. You can find them on my SSRN page, Javier El-Hage, SSRN. And I remember on the page, I wrote a paper on the Odebrecht Petrobras case, and Brazil was able to find out what was going on in that case because they had recently created the plea bargain system and made it legal for prosecutors to do exactly that. To say, you know what? I see that you have a lot of information, but you're not super important. And I don't want you. I want the president of Petrobras if you can get him for me. Like, and the guy was like, yeah, you know what? I have him on text. He's received $1 billion. You know what I mean? And so is it better? Would it have been better for the sense of justice and accountability in Brazil that the person in jail was the little guy that they found in the hotel, whatever, in the Lava Jato investigation, the first guy? Or is it better that the CEO of Petrobras is actually held to account for his hundreds of millions that he stole? You know what I mean? Like that he got in bribe. So at the end of the day, there is a logic to it, and that the plea bargain system allows you to get. Obviously, this is an example of, I think, what most of us would agree is a success story of the plea bargain. But as you mentioned, there are also injustices that can happen with that, including that someone with little education that might have committed a minor crime ends up having being convicted of something that maybe they or might even not have committed the crime, but just because of the pressure. Um, some good developments in this area has been technology. For example, with one of the actually in the another very unique feature, but that has become more popular around the world at this point, and most criminal procedure systems are similar now, is the jury system, right? The jury system that third parties, non-lawyers, get to decide on who is guilty or not. Um, and one of the things I lost my train of thought a little bit, but one of the things that the jury system creates is I forgot. I was gonna say something. I'm gonna remember. But to the cost thing, to the cost situation, the tort system, because of the contingency based system, you can get a lawyer for free. But in everywhere else, I agree, it's more complicated. That being said, there is the same type of institutions that you see in other countries. For example, legal aid. Like if you are someone that doesn't have the means because you are a drug addict, whatever, and you commit a crime, typically you will get a legal aid professional that will work for free for you and go take you to court and negotiate with the prosecutor. So those institutions exist that minimize costs. But everyone else that is caught in between, that you don't have a great $2 million case and that you are not a destitute person that gets legal aid, for those people, it can get more complicated because you actually have to take $30,000 that you don't have to pay for your lawyer. So it can bankrupt you. But there is also as a result of that, there is also litigation insurance. That's also another area of insurance to try to prevent that. I was gonna say, about the injustices of the. I remember what I was gonna say. The Innocence Project. So turns out, right? Through juries, turns out like this is all part of psychology investigations, new science that has discovered that humans, we think that we remember things, even the humans among us that think have amazing memories and that they remember things perfectly. These are the most dangerous humans because those are the ones that then say, oh yeah, I saw that guy and it was that guy, Professor Paulo, right? It was that guy. And turns out now with the Innocence Project, I teach a class at Fordham called Fundamental Learning Skills, and part of the readings include this. Uh, they have overturned, I don't know, I can't recall, I don't have the number on me right now, but hundreds uh, of convicted people have been able to be released from jail because genetics have shown, because they had something on the lab and now they ran the DNA, they have shown that they were innocent. So there's so many people that historically have been serving sentences of life sentences for having killed somebody that were completely innocent. And then now they have been exonerated through DNA in cases that most of them the overwhelming majority of them, they came from witness testimonies of someone that said, I have good memory, and I definitely remember it was that guy. And it turned out that it isn't. And then obviously, if it turns out that this happens in the South and the guy that you sent to jail is a black guy, then it has also the racial component that historically has existed in America. And so I consider philosophically, I consider myself more of a classical liberal, a libertarian. The less people in jail for me, I feel better in my life, I think. Or the so the U.S. it can be, in my opinion, very draconian too. The legal, especially the criminal justice system can be very draconian. I met a guy that spent over 30 years in prison because when he was 14, his dad was, he was born out of wedlock. His dad left him when he was a child. He lived only with his mom. He got into crime at 14, when he was 14, in a gang in the outskirts of Virginia, I think. He committed 3 crimes. Thank God he didn't kill anybody, but he committed 3 armed robberies when he was 14. Black guy, with his friends or whatever. This was under the first, when Biden was a senator. Biden promoted something called the 3 strikes law. If you commit 3 felonies, you go to jail forever. It was you go, literally, it's a 3 strikes law. If you commit 3 felonies within like 5 years, you will go to jail forever. They'll give you a life sentence without parole. So this guy got a life sentence without parole in the 1980s, and he left jail like 5 years ago. I got to know him because the law firm I worked at, the large law firm I worked at, Milback LLP, represented him, the litigation team representing him and other people, because there was a new opening in a federal law, mercy law, something that allowed for people that had already served 30 years to leave jail. So this guy was one example of that. Obviously, again, we would have to run the statistics on how many people are in situations like this, but these are examples of when I hear of cases like that, I kind of prefer my Bolivian legal system where everything is wishy-washy and jails are kind of like neighborhoods. You know what I mean? Because there's also a component of when you can be too harsh, you can be too draconian, and sometimes the U.S. criminal penitentiary system can be too draconian. Yes, please.
I'm international relations student, so I want to know more about this international thing of the U.S. law. Um, if I asked you like the legislation of the states is more important for like the companies and this international thing than the federal one. You think like the federal have, I know they have influence on that, but you think like the states have more influence on this international thing than the federal government?
That's a great question. And the short answer is no. Like at this point, yes, I would say federal regulations, because the federal government has grown dramatically, especially since the 60s, since the New Deal. Like all agencies are now big. I mean, I went around this morning, I saw the ministries here in Brasilia. They're pretty overwhelming, large buildings, beautifully built city. Uh, um, DC grew dramatically in the 1960s. All agencies now are massive, and they have a regulation system. The virtue of the regulation system in America is that they hear a lot the companies, and it's a flexible system where you adjust the rulemaking at the agency level. Uh, so, but it is for large corporations, the regulations on pharmaceutical companies, on transportation companies, on airline companies, etc., comes from federal agencies. So most large companies that operate in many different states and that operate globally, I would say that they are most likely to get in legal trouble with federal agencies, including the DOJ that is enforcing some federal law, than they are to getting into issues with state law. Where state law will take place is for, I mean, will have an influence is, um for example, the state in which a particular corporation got incorporated will that law of that state will apply in any legal dispute. But it's more that happens more at a court level, not enforcement. It's state enforcement institutions. Um, Perhaps with the exception of New York, like for example, New York State enforcement can be more international because of the nature of New York State crimes. Like essentially, New York has jurisdiction over any transfer of money that involves New York. And so because of that, they can have jurisdiction, New York State prosecutors can have jurisdiction over drug trafficking things, over all sorts of things, corruption things. And so they could, New York could be an exception there. But for the most part, what I said, for most people, I really meant most normal people. If you commit a crime as an individual, 90% of the time it's going to be a state crime, like, and you're going to go to jail in a state thing. You're never going to see even the word United States in throughout the process of even serving your sentence, because there are state penitentiaries, right? Like most of the penitentiaries are going to be state. There are some federal for people that get convicted and sentenced under federal crimes, but even the notion of federal crimes is something that historically was very small. Yeah, crimes in the context of war, crime, crimes in the context of very clear international actions of the United States as a federal country. But now, obviously, that has become another large area of the law, but it's still not as large in terms of the amount of criminal prosecution that happens in America. A fraction is federal, but they are the most famous cases. El Chapo Guzman, the other one, Maduro. This is all federal. DA, it's drug enforcement at the federal level. So those are the ones that make headline uh, most, I would say. Any questions?
Well, thank you so much, Professor Javier. It was kind of you talking to us. Guys and girls were kind of shy
No, no,
today,
no. I got enough questions.
but it is important it was important to receive you. It's important to us to get more connected. Professor Javier knows very well Brazil. We are very inner focused because we are always dealing with our problems and a kind of development we need to do and is try to be more internationalized to get in touch with our neighbors, South American neighbors, and also with United States and Europe. So we're kind to develop that skills in our school, and it is very important to all of us to receive you and hear you and learn a little bit from your
Beautiful.
perspective. Thank you so much. We expect you coming back to Brazil, and
Beautiful.
we expect visiting you in New York.
Thank you.
Skipping paying $15 for visiting New York, but I think the main attraction, the Empire State Building, but the main attraction would be visiting Human Rights Foundation headquarters
Thank you.
and also learning a little bit from you and your colleagues.
Thank you. I'm a big admirer of, and I'm lucky to have family here, and I'm a big admirer of Brazil and of this culture and everyone that is, even if you're from outside Brazil and decided to live here, big fan of you. I think this is one of the most beautiful countries. The people, one of the most beautiful. The football, the best in the world. But the one of the cool things that I admire, and that's kind of explains why I also decided to do this talk in English, is that I remember in Bolivia when I studied law, and in America too, everything is English, and in Bolivia everything was Spanish. So we only read uh, Argentinian and Mexican writers and Spanish authors. I remember that my professors of law, I did a semester of law in Sao Paulo, and as my professors of law in the different areas, it was normal to have full quotes in your book in Italian, in Spanish, in German, in English. So I found that to be very cool and very, open and very, so a Brazilian scholar, he thinks of himself, and Brazilian students think of themselves as people that need to to know other languages and to learn and to just struggle with it. Like and so because of that, and it's one of the things that I discovered living here that I admire a lot. And so that's why I treated you to an English language uh, lecture today. But nothing. Big admiration, and hopefully stay in touch, please.
Okay. So
Thank you,
class is
Professor.
closed. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank